Welcome to the Content Podcast, conversations with Silicon Valley's creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates. This episode of the Content Magazine podcast is brought to you by Bonfire, a Silicon Valley digital agency building elevated websites for ambitious brands. Find out more about Bonfire at bonfire.com.
Hello.
Today we talk with Toni Vanwinkle. She's the Senior Director of Digital Workplace Experience for Adobe. Hey Toni, this is Daniel. How are you doing?
Hey Daniel, it's great to talk to you.
I know, it's good to hear your voice. I think the last time I saw you was when you graciously hosted the lab that we had at Adobe,
Right.
and I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Absolutely. It was, we called it Flow, right? An open
Yeah.
conversation about the creative process. And it was, do you believe that that was like January 27th or so, the end of January, just before we
Yeah.
started to learn about this pandemic?
Yeah, it's crazy. It has been, in some ways, it's been a slow year, but a really fast year, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How about for you, just personally? How has this last year been on you, kind of just more personally, like emotionally and kind of psychologically? How's it been for you?
Yeah. Well, for me personally, it was, we'll talk about, perhaps the professional side of this,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
um, it was really interesting because, like many people, I'm sure, on December 31st, I decided to go out. And man, Daniel, I went all out. We went
yeah.
out and got 1920s clothing. We got a really nice hotel room. We went to this
Yeah,
really swanky party.
yeah,
And 2020 was supposed to be
yeah.
that year of like extreme focus. Well, it turns out it was.
Yeah,
And,
right?
but it was a different kind of focus. And I
Yeah.
had given my son a present. He speaks Mandarin. So
Oh, cool.
I had a business trip to go to Tokyo at the beginning of 2020 and I'll actually go to China as well. And so I gave him a Christmas present. It was actually these anime characters and
Cool.
tea and this type of thing. And he was trying to figure out, like, Mom, what the heck is this, for Christmas?
Yeah,
And then, finally I broke the news. Hey, I'm taking you to Tokyo and China.
yeah,
And, so I'm just kind of setting the stage for like how the year began. And
yeah,
we went, we had a lovely time. First time for both of us in Shanghai. And, coming back, we saw like this emergence of like, there was medical stations in the airport and,
huh,
there
yeah,
was stuff like that going on. And we came back and I talked to, people and they said, no, you're fine. You're good to go to China.
yeah,
And then we came back and just a few months later, we're having a conversation about shutting down all of our global offices and starting to
yeah,
talk about how do we react to what was happening in that landscape. Um, so when did that, my job is to manage the technology that supports our business
yeah,
wherever that business happens. And so I was at the center of that storm.
yeah,
Um, I brought my son back from school, and he was going to freshman year in college over on the
oh,
East
cool.
Coast. And he flew in like on March 16th, the day that we started the
Oh,
shutdown. It was like the
yeah,
last flight from Washington, D.C. Picked
yeah,
him up, strangest day in San Francisco airport. No one was there. Got back
yeah,
home. And then the year unfolded. It was George Floyd and all
yeah,
the social injustice issues. It was
yeah,
politics and
yeah,
that permeated everything. It was just an incredibly heavy year.
yeah,
And as an African American Black woman,
hmm,
in your business, you're actually at the center of that storm of
yeah,
like, how do you show up
hmm,
as a leader, as a Black person, as a woman, as a mom,
hmm,
etc. And
yeah,
so it was a heavy year, Daniel. I know I said a
yeah.
whole bunch, but
No, yeah,
there
yeah, I'm,
it was a heavy
yeah,
year.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, it is, and it is kind of strange too because there was so much optimism and excitement
Yeah,
as people were coming to 2020, right? Especially because 2020 means vision, you know what I mean? All that kind of stuff. And then
totally. Yeah.
it turned out to be such an interesting time. So, what would you say before? I definitely want to talk to you about the business side, but before we get there, it's just like, then from you, what do you think was a lesson or something that you feel like
Yeah.
you grew, or and sometimes it's that a painting or a pulling off of a or opening a wound that brings
Yeah.
some growth. But what for you would say was an area that you felt you personally grew in through this last year?
Yeah. I think that there's a couple of pieces to that. One was um, kind of a confirmation in my faith in human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I say that is there was one day when, right after the George Floyd killing,
Mm-hmm.
that I turned on the television, and I generally watch global news.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, oddly enough, an Asian man standing on a rock in Greece with a
Mm.
sign that said Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
it was,
Yeah.
and I saw the rise in London. And then, like across, around the world, people were saying, we will not tolerate this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was this visceral, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I cannot believe that's happening. And so I think from that was one of the core learnings. The other thing is I needed to understand a little bit more deeply about how we got here.
Mm.
And,
Yeah.
you would think, hey, yeah, I know all the history of our country and et cetera, et cetera. But there was some unpacking about how we got to this place. So I
Yeah.
learned a lot about that. And then
Yeah.
I learned a lot about leadership through crisis.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I have to admit, and I'm still kind of get teary eyed just because when the demonstrations started to happen and stuff like that, I had this overwhelming, I don't even know, depression and I don't know, scaredness
Yeah.
because I was kind of raised. I mean, I was born in the 60s. So I remember very kind of like in a small little memory in my head, like, Martin Luther King and,
Mhm.
JFK, like the assassinations, and Malcolm
Yeah.
X, all these kind of things happening. And growing up, even with Vietnam and demonstrations, kind of like in the back of my mind, and then seeing Rodney King. And then when this went down, I was so fearful to be hopeful, which is so sad.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and I do. I mean, I'm so excited that it really, that I guess there has to be so many swings at the tree before it falls down, or bangs on the wall before it knocks down,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so I want to be hopeful, but I'm at the same time I was like, oh my gosh, some of the people, even still, some of my white friends in the suburbs
Hmm.
I talk to, and I'm like, I'm still baffled. I'm like,
Yeah.
do you know, like, it wasn't until like the 70s where Black Americans could get loans for houses and couldn't live in this. No, do you understand that? And they're
Yeah.
like, well, not, and yeah. So, I mean, still, there's like I don't even know what it is. There's a tension in me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You want
Do
you
you?
want to be optimistic. I talk about when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and uh, that day, Daniel, my son, he's here going to college in the next room, and so on.
Yeah.
So he comes out and he's just like, Mom, I got to get out of here. We're all in
Yeah.
lockdown and, blah, blah, blah. I got to get out of here. I'm going to go for a hike.
Yeah.
And terror and
Mm. Mm.
excitement was like, like I grew up here in California. I
Yeah.
grew up in San Jose. Like going for a
Yeah.
hike in Santa Cruz Mountains, I'm not worried about it. 2020, I was in
Mm.
tears until he came home.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
in tears. And my
Yeah.
son is like, he speaks three languages. He's, like
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
an engineer. He's like all the good things, all the promise that we have in
Yeah.
life, right?
Yeah.
And he's my baby, but he's
Yeah.
a good
Totally.
guy. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking he could run into someone. that
Yeah.
mistakes him for a
Yeah.
wild animal and kills him.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's the stuff that I had to unpack in 2020. And
Yeah.
it sounds like you had that kind of same visceral feeling. I had
Yeah.
hope, like
Yeah.
seeing that sign, seeing everybody stand up and use their voice
Yeah.
and lean in, including at Adobe in my organization, to see
Yeah.
people lean into this uncomfortable place was
Yeah.
awesome. But yeah, I'm still a little bit like, we've got some stuff to do. We got work to
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is like, and I think the difficult and the scary, sad thing for white Americans is because they haven't seen it, that so therefore they equate it as it's not real. And that is like the biggest hurdle, I think. I mean, for me being half white, half Mexican, like I always kind of lived in this two kind of worlds, right? Where
And
like I could be with my white family and it was amazing some of the things they would say about Mexicans, and I could be with my Mexican family
yeah.
and be surprised at what they say about white people. And so there's always kind of that thing. But I think that's the biggest and even as I say it, that's what scares me the most, is because when you don't even see it,
Yeah.
you can't address it. And therefore, if, and that, oh, I just pray that
Hmm.
that's melting down. And through the conversations and regular,
Yeah.
awareness, we'll get there, and it'll happen.
Yeah. That's my hope and my prayer is that
Yeah.
we get there. And I mean, it takes these moments for us to, step into that space to make the change.
Yeah.
So I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of people doing that right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. All right. Well, there you go.
I know it's a heavy. Wow, we started
It's
off
a
in a very heavy place. Yeah,
yeah.
it resonates with me that I was also born in the '60s, and
Yeah.
I was born in Bogalusa, Louisiana, and
Okay.
I came
Yeah.
to San Jose when I was about 2 years old. And
Yeah.
my father and my mother, they were activists, back in
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana. Like, they went and protest so that they could
Yeah.
go like have milkshakes at the same counter as the white
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
and all this
Yeah.
other stuff. And I'm sure it about killed my dad that I married a white guy,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and this type of thing. But he would tell me as I was growing up in San Jose that like the struggle is real. And I'd be just like, no, no way, Dad. Like I was
Yeah.
just at Day on the Green. Like I just saw REO Speedwagon. Like everybody was wonderful,
Yeah.
and this type of thing. He's like, okay, like one day you'll know,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's interesting. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's transition. I mean, I do want to talk about your work career and the amazing things that you're doing, but let's transition from this subject to talk about, because at Adobe, you started the Black Employee Network,
I
right?
did. Yeah.
So, what was some of the impetus on that?
Mhm.
And I did want to ask you questions about being in tech as a woman and as a Black woman, but let's start. What was how did that come about to start the Black Employee Network at Adobe?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I think part of this was an examination back, this probably in 2016 or so, where we were really looking at the numbers,
Mm,
representation numbers
yeah,
of people of color in
yeah,
tech.
yeah,
And the numbers for African Americans or Black employees were super small, particularly
yeah,
in leadership positions. I think even now we only have a handful in Fortune 500
yeah.
companies, CEOs, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
Um, and so, what we wanted to be able to do is put some structure around how do we address this? And
Yeah,
that involved, looking at, how do we change our recruiting practices to increase
hmm,
representation? How do we develop and grow the Black employees that we already have? Um,
yeah,
and then, kind of this bigger thing around how do I show up authentically and feel like I belong, right?
yeah, yeah,
And then
yeah,
I think the last piece is like, how can we differentiate ourselves and actually help other tech companies rise to this occasion and step into the space?
yeah,
And I remember some of these first meetings because there was like, like a handful of Black people in San Jose in a meeting room, and
Yeah.
half of the room was like, I didn't realize there was another Black person, like that type of
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
and it's grown just enormously. I know I'm no longer the executive sponsor for that, but it was nice to plant that seed. And
Yeah.
then very soon after, we started OLA, which is the Latinx group. We
Right.
started the Asian Employee Network. We
Oh,
started abilities. We looked at military, like it
yeah.
expanded. And we already had a really strong presence for really helping women in tech, but
Okay.
there was nothing around, affinity groups around ethnicity. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you find, I mean, being in tech, and I know that you've done like your history kind of been in tech and with even Cisco, I think a little bit, some other companies that I didn't recognize the names of. But as a woman and as an African American woman, was there the necessity for you to prove yourself all the time? You know what I mean? Or did you feel like there was a disadvantage?
Well, yeah, I think I know where you're going. Let me just put it to you this way. My dad was, engineer, mathematician type person,
Mm-hmm.
and a realist.
Yeah.
And he said, Tony, you can do anything you
Yeah.
want to do.
Yeah.
Just remember, you are a woman. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
limit, right? It's not
Yeah.
a
Right.
handicap. You are Black, not a
Mm-hmm.
handicap, not a limit. Doesn't mean you
Mm-hmm.
can't do stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but other people might think that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so here's the reality, sweetheart, is you're going to have to, my dad saying this to me, you're going to
Yeah.
have to work really hard. And
Yeah.
so in his generation, it was all about get the education, get the experience, check all the boxes. So I
Yeah.
spent a lot of my preparation getting into tech and this type of thing and moving up through the ranks,
Yeah.
feeling that I needed to be overly, like
Yeah.
certified and pursuing, like education and, like making sure I checked all the boxes perfectly.
Right.
And in some ways, that became somewhat limiting to myself because I
Hmm.
thought, okay, well, I'm not yet to perfection, so I can't step into that space yet.
Oh, yeah.
Now, so that was
Sure.
just my personal, filter. People have asked me, like, Tony, have you ever been discriminated against or, did this limit your career? I have to say that perhaps, but I
Yeah.
don't know that for sure.
Right.
So
Yeah.
what I had to go on is the fact that I developed the skills to be excellent at my job. And I
Yeah.
say that in a my own bar of excellence.
Yeah.
I wanted to be good at what I did. And I always was sharpening the saw. Like
Yeah.
today, I'm learning every single day, 30 years into my career, every day I push myself to think about what's next. And
Yeah.
so I don't know if that really answers your question, but
Yeah.
I didn't come to work thinking, I'm a girl and I'm Black and, and therefore, I need to over rotate. But I did feel that there was a bar for me, and
Hmm.
I had to really push myself. And
Yeah.
and I don't, and maybe that was a realism from my dad, kind of settling in there. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, I mean, then definitely you have demonstrated an excellence. I mean, you even received a award for the Digital Workplace
That's,
Leader of the Year in 2019, which I think is such a great way to talk about transition because the digital workspace 2019, this is pre pandemic,
yeah.
pre lockdown. And so you've been working with Adobe to kind of, there's 22,000 plus employees, right? And there's
Mhm.
37 countries, probably more than that you're in. And so now with your job, so you're helping, uh, I guess, build the corporate identity and production and doing that across the board and all through the digital workspace.
Yeah.
Why don't you explain what you do?
Yeah. Hey Tony, what's your gig?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
So
exactly do you do? Yeah.
yeah, what do you do? So really the mission of the team is to make sure that our employees can innovate, collaborate, and be productive from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a nice sentence to say I'm responsible for the employee experience
Yeah.
and how employees get their work done on a daily basis. So I have a UX design team. I have a team that works on collaboration and production tools like the one that we're using for our call today. I have a team that works on integrating technology into the physical workspace. So once we get
Mhm.
back to work, we'll talk about those types of technology,
Yeah.
productivity tools. How do we do automation,
Yeah.
optimizing email and messaging,
Yeah.
um, you know, uh, things like that, and even e-learning and how do we do self-paced learning in the enterprise, and then all the endpoints we use in the enterprise. So your laptops, your desktops, your mobile
Wow.
phones, all the
Yeah.
security that goes along with that, and everything we do to support you. So if something breaks, there's members of my team around the world that really help people stay productive. So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
a lot.
Wow. Yeah. Now, are the tools that you're using, and so this is somewhat within Adobe. These aren't necessarily, right? So these aren't products and tools that you're sending out to the world, but these are things to make so the people who are developing and supporting the excuse me, the Adobe products, you're helping them be productive in doing
Yeah,
that and enjoy. Yeah. Are
yeah,
there things that you're develop? Yeah. Go
yeah.
ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, no, no. It's absolutely that. But I'm glad you mentioned Adobe products because my team is also responsible for customer zero. So we want to
Okay.
drink our own champagne. So
Yeah.
how do we use Adobe products within that mix? And
Yeah.
so, we have things like Adobe Sign that we use in workflows. We have things like our own content management system that
Okay.
we do our internal intranet on and things like that. So we
Yeah.
use our
Yeah.
own products
Yeah.
to make sure we're optimizing that employee experience. Yeah,
Yeah. That's really cool.
yeah,
So, now, so then, okay, then COVID hits. And so Adobe, of course, you've been doing this with your company across the world.
uh-huh.
So, of course, I imagine you guys were pretty prepared. So Adobe didn't necessarily have too much of a hiccup, I would assume, transitioning into this work from home environment. Or what was that like for you and your
Yeah.
team and for the company?
Yeah, it was. So I have been doing this particular role for about 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
and we use human-centered design to
Mm-hmm.
create the experiences that we create for employees. So that just means going out and doing some research and understanding how people work in our environment.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we saw through our persona analysis and journey mapping, this is all a part of design thinking, we found something called what I call the digital nomad.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that digital nomad is very much like my college age son and all the people younger than him. They don't, they're actually not tethered to a physical space to get their stuff done,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so my son like never had to carry like a heavy backpack of books to school.
Right.
He had an iPad, right?
Right.
And so we saw this emerging in the environment. And what that meant is that we were ready for people to work anywhere. And
Yeah.
that was the one of the bases of our strategy. The way it unfolded was, that weekend before we went into shutdown in San Jose, which I believe was March 16th,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it was a call to action from our senior leadership. We're sending our employees home. They're going to be safe. And oh, by the way, we're going to do that around the world.
Right.
Toni, will that work? And I said, yes, it will. And
Good.
so, they, my boss, the CIO of the organization, she tells the story. She's like, she was a little nervous and a little restless on Sunday, and she expected like the whole world to blow up on Monday. And what she got on Monday was compliments.
Wow.
Like, I can still
Yeah.
do my business, which
Yeah.
was fantastic. And
Yeah.
so, actually, this year we won the CIO 100 award, and
Awesome.
that was pieces of being ready for this transition, but it was also some of the innovations we did as we were dealing with the crisis throughout the year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I imagine in many ways for you on a business professional level, this was probably an extremely busy year, right?
Oh yeah, it
Uh,
was crazy busy. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh. It was
It's
crazy.
kind of I mean, that's the thing that's kind of seems to be what's going on is like one hand you had people that were being let off, but other people's like increased what you're doing. And some of it was, a lot of companies and people and small businesses and stuff like pivoted and it
Mhm.
increased, like see restaurants even turning it to do
Yeah.
completely takeout. They had to re-engineer everything.
Yeah.
So, um,
Yeah, it's such a good point because while we were ready, we certainly had a year of innovation. Just think about the
yeah,
mechanisms like the restaurant scenario. You need to
yeah,
change your business model just a little bit. And so there are
yeah,
things we needed to do to change our business model. We usually have, for example, internships that are at physical office locations.
yeah, yeah.
So, how do you onboard 1,000
Mm-hmm.
interns around the world remotely without touching computers?
Yeah, yeah,
So, you
yeah,
know, an innovation happened and we were able to, deploy remote desktops and, onboard people with physical laptops through distribution systems that made that work
yeah,
and deploy and actually retrieve those devices back. So there was a ton of innovation that happened throughout the year, which I think will impact how we work going forward. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. I just went to Camino Brewery, and I'm not sure if you've been over there, First Street, great place. But like them and a lot of other restaurants, they've implemented the QR code, which was kind of funny because QR codes were kind of came out, everybody was excited about them, they kind of disappeared. But now you use the QR code, you click it, and you order directly from your table. It knows what table you're at, and the server can bring it right over, which they've been doing this kind of stuff. Like in Asia, they've had these kind of restaurants that do that and stuff
Mhm.
already. But I'm wondering, I was like, wow, as a restaurant owner, like you can cut down on your servers. He's kind of more efficient. So I am excited and interested to see what new practices will continue once we move into the green. So
Yeah.
for you then, what? So this is interesting because with digital workspace and technologies, um, I think one of the kind of I don't know, scientific fears or sci-fi fears is like, the loss of the humanity and the human touch.
Mm.
How do you, with Adobe and for what you're doing, ensure that there's still that uh, the humanness to even the
Yeah.
digital workspace?
Yeah. Um, yeah, thank you for that question. So, philosophically, this is my philosophy about technology,
Yeah.
and is I believe that technology should make us more human.
Okay.
What do I mean by that? It should provide a vehicle for us to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Imagine that grandmother connecting with her grandchildren around the world, right?
Yeah.
We should be able to do that. It should allow us to focus on things of greater value, which means that I can automate these things that don't expand our thinking, like these really repetitive processes, so that you
Yeah.
can do bigger things, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that is my hope. And so this is the reason why we use human centered design. And one of the things we ask Daniel in that design process as we learn about people is what value do you want to bring to this enterprise? And moreover, like what value do you want to bring to society, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in understanding that, we can help them with the workflows that produce, those beautiful products that you see, like Photoshop and,
Yeah.
enhancements to the Creative Cloud and, AI and
Mm-hmm.
more ethical ways to think about technology. And so,
Yeah.
so we bring the humanness by understanding what humans need
Yeah.
and to kind of help the human as the assistant to the human so that they can be all they need to be and do their best work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. I have to say, yeah, I mean, it's like I remember when I started doing digital photography rather than film photography, that I was like, okay, this is great. Rather than spending hours in the dark room, and my kids were young at the time, I was like, I can actually work in Photoshop and, well, and then I can have the same effect that I did, or burning and dodging, and not have to do it with a human, infallibility, but get the same result. And then I could still like talk to them and watch them and have them play next to me rather than being locked up in a dark room. But
Hmm.
so that's awesome. But then in COVID, I built a dark room because I've missed that tangible part of processing. Now that my kids are older, right, I don't have to watch them. But so yeah, that's the thing. So I guess what you're saying is like the goal is to help the technology uh, enable the people to do the things that only could be done in the physical space. I guess that's the idea. Would you say? Is that how you would
Yeah.
sum it up?
Well, yeah, it's just helping people have the capacity to do what they need to focus on, and whether that is, planting a garden with your kids because I'm able to automate some piece of your world,
Yeah,
or to create the next big product because I give you technology that allows you to do that systemically,
yeah,
in the non-physical world as well, or I provide you with a game that allows you to turn off and focus on your well-being.
yeah,
Like all of those are ways that technologies can help us become more human. Now here's the problem, is the problem with that, that's Tony's philosophy. The problem with that is that there's a whole bunch of people that create technology through their own lens, and
yeah.
so that means that we have technology out there that is actually not good for humans.
Sure. Yeah,
And my hope is that we remove that situation, and and we lean towards technology for good instead of for bad. But
yeah.
we work on things like, how do you remove bias from your
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah,
Things like that. How do you have ethics in automation and this type of thing? So we ask these kinds of questions,
yeah.
of ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So then I guess what I'm kind of hearing too, so you say, are there tools within Adobe, like you said there, you guys have a production tool that's not that is not a commercial product yet, or you're kind of testing within? Is there those kind of things going on behind the big
Yeah.
walls of Adobe? Can you
Yeah.
even talk about it? Or is
Yeah,
it?
I can't. And it's like I can't talk about it. I will have to destroy this tape if I say anything.
Yeah,
But we are always, one of the things Shantanu says, who's our CEO,
Mm,
he's like, look around the corner. Always be looking around the corner. Always be curious.
yeah.
And he invests in that way as well. So we have a wonderful research team, and just probably some of the most remarkable, amazing um, architects and technologists and scientists in the
Mm-hmm.
world at
Yeah.
Adobe. And it's really cool seeing what's happening with emerging technology. And it's really cool to see that technology used for good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. So, and also that you have a history of mentoring and coaching and training and helping up next generation leaders. And what has that? What do you think has sparked that in you, to kind of be a part of that type of leading and mentoring?
Yeah. Um, you know, I I have a very complicated, I had a kind of a complicated childhood, right? And
Okay.
it was a little messy, a little chaotic.
Mm,
And, to the point when I was at 16, I was, kind of a homeless sofa surfer. And,
mm,
no, I'm an only child. My parents were not around. And just because of the space they were in at that moment.
yeah.
And at that point, there was something in my life that said, or in myself that said, you can't be a statistic. Like,
Hmm.
I don't want to do that. And I needed to figure out how to put that all back together and create a new possibility for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
had some people that I met along the way. A lot of people that helped, a lot of bad people that I ran into that codified I didn't want to be a bad person.
Sure.
And, a lot of mentors and people who gave me opportunities. And my first mentor, I met when I was in my early 20s. His name was Bob Hirsch, and I worked for a company called Alps Electric. And at that company, I hadn't settled on what I wanted to do, but I was really good at putting things in order. Perhaps because I had so much chaos in my world,
Mm.
and
Mm.
order made me feel like life was in control.
Yeah.
And in doing so, he was like, "Kid, you're like really good at this. Let me pay for your college while I give you a gig." And in
Awesome.
that company, in those first years, I went from an individual contributor to a corporate controller in that company.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
to management, he taught me everything around the whole business, and it increased my confidence to a point where I was like, I'm ready to fly now. And I
Yeah.
moved out and did consulting work. And yes, I worked at Cisco and then back at Adobe. Now, why do I tell you all this? Because if Bob didn't give me that opportunity,
Yeah.
I may have been a statistic.
Mm. Yeah.
And so the
Yeah.
reason why I work with these girls is to give them a vision of what's possible, what is evident in your life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
honestly, it was in February, right before the shutdown. There's a group of girls that comes from a IT school in London for kind of a tech tour. They go to a whole bunch of different tech companies, and I always host them at Adobe.
Mm.
And I walk into this room of girls. There's probably a room of 40, girls.
Mm-hmm.
They're all high school, real high performers, very diverse girls, and they're all chattering at these tables in this conference room. And I walk up to the tables and they're just chattering, "Hey girls, what are you talking about?" And they'd whisper back to me and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, "Oh, that's interesting." I got up on stage and I said, "Ladies, I walked to each of your tables and you were chattering when I walked in the room. What did you all notice about me?" And the 40 girls said, "You're black."
Hmm.
And I said, "Ladies, tell me why that matters." And they
Hmm.
said, "We have never seen a black
Mm.
woman executive in technology."
Wow. Wow.
And it's
Yeah.
moments like that, Daniel, where I
Yeah.
say, why not?
Yeah.
Why haven't you
Yeah.
seen this example before?
Yeah.
And that drives me to show up for these girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is. It's amazing to hear people's stories. I mean, that's what we do, but the influence of having that one person who speaks into your life, the hope and the positivity and helps, just how what a difference that makes and the importance that is in our lives, that connection to have that.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, yeah, that is awesome. So now also are a part of ALF, the American
I
Leadership Forum.
am.
I see. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. I'm a senior fellow too. Actually, I went through it. So I
Yeah. You and
imagine,
Suzanne were in the same class, or?
yeah, we were in the it's the urbanist class. Yeah,
Okay,
something
cool.
like that. Yeah, yeah, that's cool. So also too, I was going to ask you, did you have an opportunity to work with Chuck Geschke, and were you there? He was probably not the. They were still on the board, and John.
Yeah, they were, of course, we always had an opportunity to see Chuck and John in events and I had personal interactions because I also am the site leader for our San Jose site, which means I try to connect communities within our
Yeah,
organization and communities to employees to the communities that we
yeah,
work and live in. And
yeah.
so part of that is, you get a chance to meet our founders. And so while I did not know Chuck very well, I knew
Mm-hmm.
he was before me. He was the only ALF fellow at Adobe.
You're right. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So yes, and we lost him this year. And
yeah,
what an amazing stage setting of these leaders saying we wanted to create a company that we would work for.
yeah, yeah,
And that resonates with me so much. Like I
yeah,
want to be a leader that I would work for.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, I know that one thing when we interviewed him, John had said, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was John. He said like, to be a good leader, you don't have to be a jerk. It's like you can be a nice person. And
Totally.
that was like that was just like awesome. And I think you really represent that. I mean, site leader, the director of, digital workplace technologies. I mean, you're doing a lot of stuff. But even as I'm talking to you here, it's just that the personalness, the vulnerability, and it's very encouraging and endearing, to meet people who are in positions, especially like a company like Adobe that's changing the world, who have empathy, who have, who are connected. And so thank you for that. Um,
Yeah.
what would you say for you personally is like your driving philosophical life mission? What is it
Wow.
that kind of like that drives you?
My life mission. So I'm still on a quest to find my complete life mission. I think I'm somewhat living in it. Some of it has to do with what I said before, is that you
Mm-hmm.
need to have a vision for your life beyond what is evident. So standing in that place where it wasn't possible for me to be where I am today, but
Yeah.
having a vision of where I could be,
Yeah.
So, and that changes as you get older. So at this point in my life, it's really about, um, it's about legacy,
Mm.
and it's also about service.
Yeah.
So I hope that I create a legacy of leaders
Yeah.
that hold that human side of leadership
Mm-hmm.
and that technical side of giving value to the businesses that they serve and the
Mm-hmm.
communities they serve.
Yeah.
Um, I think from a service perspective, there's a greater impact that I want to have in my community, the San Jose community,
Mm-hmm.
and the Bay Area community at large, and perhaps even more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm digging in for that.
Yeah.
I think about three words for me personally. Well, maybe four. One of them I've had all of my life, which is this word called integrity.
Okay. Yeah.
Meaning, I'm going to show up. If you need me to show up, I'm going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And it also means that complete. Like,
Yeah.
it took a long time for me to say I'm enough,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like I'm enough now,
Yeah.
even though I want to learn more. Faith is a huge thing. It goes
Mm-hmm.
back to that belief, and I don't know how I became such an optimist with some of the things that we're talking about, the heaviness of some of this stuff in the world. But I
Yeah.
am an optimist, and I don't know if that's I don't know where that comes from, but I do have faith in that.
Mm.
Courage, being able to, you know, even though you're scared to death, being able to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And then action.
Hmm.
I think you can have all the faith and optimism and courage in the universe, but if you do not take action, it
Yeah.
just will sit with you
Yeah.
and go nowhere. So those are I think that's, yeah, I'll just
Definitions.
leave it there. There's a whole bunch of
Yeah.
other stuff. We could probably talk philosophically for a long
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Integrity, faith, courage, and action. Those are really great points. And I was going to ask you, like, what would some advice would you give somebody who, a woman or a person of color or, somebody coming up? But I think that those four words really encapsulate a lot of, cover a lot of ground. Was there ever a time in your life, in your career, where you kind of just felt like giving up? Like, I'm just going to, this is the wrong industry or this is the wrong career, or I just, did you ever have one of those kind of moments?
I've had multiple of those moments.
Yeah, right. Good.
It's
That's the honest answer. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I've had multiple of those moments. It's usually an indicator for me that I need to change.
yeah.
So, um, I was, when I left Alps, and it was wonderful. When I left Alps to go into consulting, I
Mm-hmm.
knew that I had something I was balancing personally, which
Mm.
is I wanted to have a child, and
Yeah.
and I just had horrible infertility issues, and so I needed something
Mm,
more flexible. So I
yeah.
was miserable in that. I solved the problem. I went and did consulting for a while, and then it was just like, gosh, I have no connection to a community,
Yeah.
jumping from gig to gig. And so
Right.
that's when I went into Cisco
Hmm.
and decided I needed to change that up. Of course, my son was already here. And I have to say, unconditional love exists. That child,
Mm.
um, I am just so in love with him. It's amazing.
Yeah. So,
When I left Cisco to come to Adobe, I can't say that I was like unhappy. In fact, it was kind of like chocolate cake or chocolate cookies, and I like
right.
them both. But it was at a moment where it's like I I need to grow, do something different. I need to drive in a different parking lot, and so
Yeah.
I use those moments as reflection into, well, what's going on with me right here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's awesome.
yeah, I haven't never been like, you know, like I'm gonna quit per se, but I
Yeah.
have kind of had those moments like, dude, I cannot do this another day.
Yeah. 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 That's good. Yeah. That's the thing. It's like once you do get eh, that tension of some sorts at whatever level, it's obviously the sign that like, okay, there's needs to be change and action needs to be taken. Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I remember back in my early days when I, out of high school, didn't know what I was doing before I went to college. I worked in a cannery graveyard up in Oregon. And I remember after like about a month doing that with almost like no days off, I was walking up the stairs into the clock room, to clock in. I was thinking like, if I trip and fall and break my leg, I won't have to go to work.
Oh
And I was
wow.
so then I was thinking like, I think it's time for me to change. you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I am
If
so
you have
glad you did because you're doing such great work, Daniel.
Oh
I
yeah, that
am.
was thanks. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So then, yeah. Then what are you looking forward to as you're coming? COVID's kind of coming to it. Well, hopefully coming to a. I don't want to say a close, but we're opening up a little bit more. But for you, what are you excited about as you're looking into um, the rest of 21 and into 22?
Yeah. So, once we of course are getting ready for, to re-enter the workplace and things like that. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited about what the future of work promises, not only at a human level, because I love people, Daniel. I'm ready.
yeah.
I'm ready to see people.
yeah.
And so like I'm ready for us to have another pickup party and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about what's possible around that from a human perspective, but
Yeah.
also from a technology perspective, because we believe that the future of work will be flexible and it will be
Mm-hmm.
hybrid. So,
Yeah.
we're going to have mixed modes of work. And that gives me and my team an opportunity to showcase how technology can really help with that experience and help us
Yeah.
stay more human and well and that type of thing while doing remarkable work. So
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. I'm excited about leaning into projects with my ALF senior fellows to see
Mm.
what we can collaborate on,
Yeah.
um, and that type of thing, including yourself.
Yeah.
And Suzanne calls us the COVID class because literally we were the COVID class. We started on March 16th. you know,
oh, wow.
so I'm excited about what can happen with my senior fellows to create impact in our local community around here. What a fantastic network of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Some great folks.
I'm
Yeah.
excited. Believe it or not, I was tormented to send my son to college.
Mm.
I was just having a serious empty nest
Sure.
problem. Like I needed therapy, Daniel. And
yeah.
now,
Yeah.
after being locked up with him for 15 months, I'm like, I got you an apartment. We're sending you away. And so I think I can release the child into the world.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's good. Well, kind of what a good gift then, right? To be able to have them around and then do that.
yeah,
Yeah, it definitely comes a point, right, where it's like, yeah, yeah. With my son too, it's like he stuck around here for junior college, and wanted to go away, but then COVID hit and stuff. And now it's like, yeah, and it's not that it's bad, but it's like, yeah, in your growing up, it's time for you to move on,
Yeah.
which is good, yeah.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the other day he was talking to me about something, and literally I just stopped at the kitchen, we have an island in the kitchen. I just
Yeah.
stopped at the kitchen counter and I just was in a moment of silence realizing there is a man standing in front.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
no longer my baby. Uh,
Yeah.
he's a man, so it's time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, good. Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and just taking time to talk and kind of share your life and about what you're doing there at Adobe, which is super fascinating. And I just thank you for your time, Toni, and look forward to seeing you out around town sometime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Soon, soon, my friend. All
Yes. Yes.
right.
All right. Take it
Okay.
easy. We'll
Yeah,
talk to
take
you later.
care. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Find out more about Toni and connect with her on her LinkedIn at Toni Vanwinkle. Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Visit our website to become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the local creatives. This episode's music is Tang by Chris Inman, who is featured in issue 13.2. Follow him on Spotify at Chris Inman and on Instagram at chris.inman, as well as his record label, Orange Label Records.